Have you ever stood at the edge of your life, with nothing left but a heartbeat and a wild, stubborn hope? Cole Barrett did. He was broke. No land, no future, just $900 in his pocket and a fire in his gut that said, "Try one more time." So he bought the only thing he could afford, a broken-down abandoned farm, way out in the middle of nowhere. Dry earth, cracked wood, not a soul for miles. Most folks would have laughed and walked away. But Cole, he saw something. He didn't know what. He just felt it. And what he uncovered, secret, hidden from sight for decades, it wasn't just surprising, it was unbelievable. You're about to hear a story where the line between luck and fate gets real blurry, where a forgotten farm whispers secrets and a desperate man finds something no one else ever thought to look for. So don't blink, don't skip. Because the moment Cole climbed up into that attic, his life and this story changed forever. Let's begin. The air conditioner in room 14 of the Maple Leaf Motel buzzed like a dying cicada. Cole Barrett lay on top of the polyester blanket, still in yesterday's jeans and shirt, one boot on, one off, staring at the cracked ceiling with bloodshot eyes. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours, not because he wasn't tired, God knew he was, but because every time he shut his eyes, his mind flooded with the same relentless loop. The layoff, the bills, the foreclosure, the way folks in Tulsa looked at him now like he'd failed a test they all passed. His phone lit up beside him, its battery clinging to 8% life. A single notification blinked. Account balance, $926.12. He stared at the number, blinking slow. $926 to his name. That was it. That was everything he had in the world. 3 months ago, he was a lead mechanical engineer at a parts manufacturing plant in Tulsa. 20 years of seniority, a corner desk near the window, a decent paycheck that paid for a 2-bedroom house, a Silverado with only one dent, and the occasional fishing trip with his brother on Lake Tenkiller. Then the plant shut down without warning. Management called it restructuring. Cole called it betrayal. He applied everywhere, pipe yards, oil fields, even a warehouse job at Walmart. Nothing stuck. Employers didn't want a 45-year-old with 2 decades of specialized experience when they could hire a fresh 20-something for half the cost. His brother, Dale, had offered him a spot in the trailer on his property, but Cole turned it down. Pride, or maybe stubbornness. He didn't want to be anyone's burden, didn't want to see that look in their eyes, the one that said, "You used to be somebody." The Maple Leaf Motel cost him $48 a night. He'd been staying 3 nights a week, sleeping in his truck the rest. It was getting cold now, though. Early October in the Ozarks meant chilly mornings and dew-soaked windshields. He had to figure something out, and fast. That morning, the motel coffee was burnt and bitter, but Cole drank it anyway. He pocketed a biscuit wrapped in a napkin and stepped outside into the bright Arkansas sun, the kind that made the cracked pavement shimmer. The road out front stretched empty in both directions. Across the street was a faded sign that read, "Willa Mae's Diner." The diner smelled like frying bacon and pine cleaner. Cole slid into a booth by the window, nursing his coffee and pretending to read the classifieds in the local paper. 2 men sat behind him at the counter, their voices low and gravelly. "You hear they're doing another auction over at the county building? Friday at noon." "Same as always? Back taxes and repoed land?" "Yup, most of it junk. But there's that one place, Whitmore Farm, off Highway 12, old place in Red Hollow. Been empty since the fire." Cole's ears perked up. He slowly lowered the paper. "Place is cursed," the second man said. "They say the last guy to own it disappeared." "Still, reserve's only $900. If I had the money, I'd take the land just for the timber. Ain't many places that cheap no more." $900. Cole didn't know where Red Hollow was, but he knew he had $926 in his bank account. His heart thudded once, heavy. He left the diner without finishing his breakfast. That night, he sat in his truck, staring at Google Maps on his cracked phone. Red Hollow was a tiny speck northwest of Little Rock, tucked between wooded hills and dusty farm roads. The listing was on the county website. No photos, just a line of text. Property number 33-291, Whitmore Farm, approximate 6 acres, 1 structure. Minimum bid, $900. Cashier's check required. It felt stupid, it felt reckless, but it also felt like the first door that hadn't slammed in his face in months. The next morning, Cole withdrew everything he had. The bank teller raised an eyebrow at the amount. "Taking a trip?" "Something like that," he said. The drive took him 5 hours. The closer he got to Red Hollow, the narrower the roads became. Fields gave way to forest. The trees pressed in like sentinels, their branches casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. The town itself was little more than a crossroads, a gas station, a post office, a shuttered high school. Time seemed to have stopped here around 1974. The county building was a squat brick structure with mildew on the north wall and a flickering fluorescent light in the entryway. The auction room had 6 chairs. Only 3 were filled. An old man in overalls, a woman scribbling in a notepad, and Cole. One by one, the properties were called. Foreclosed trailers, half-acre lots, no bids. Then, property number 33-291, Whitmore Farm, minimum bid $900. Silence. Cole raised his hand. The auctioneer's voice echoed, "We have 900. Any other bids?" Nothing. Going once, going twice, sold, to the gentleman in the back. Papers were signed. The county clerk, a middle-aged woman with gray streaks in her braid, looked him over as he slid the cashier's check across the desk. "You know what you're buying, Mr. Barrett." "An old farm," he replied, as steady as he could. She gave him a tired look. "You're buying the Whitmore curse is what you're buying. Folks around here don't go near that place. Bad things happen out there." Cole gave a tight smile. "I've had my fill of bad already." She handed him the keys, just one, rusty and bent, and whispered, "Sometimes the end of the road ain't the end. It's just the dirt path to something bigger." He wasn't sure if it was encouragement or a warning. Cole reached the property at sunset. The gravel road twisted through a pine thicket and opened into a clearing where the house sat, bowed and weary. The roof sagged on one side. The paint had long peeled away. Weeds swallowed the front porch. The barn behind the house leaned like a drunk. He parked the truck and sat still for a long moment. What the hell have I done? The front door creaked open with a sound like a scream. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The floors moaned under his boots. In the living room was an old couch covered in a floral sheet, a lamp with no bulb, and a fireplace filled with black ash. He laid his sleeping bag on the floor, close to the wall, away from the broken window. As darkness settled in, the house made itself known. Settling timbers, creaking rafters, something scratching in the attic overhead. He stared at the ceiling, heart hammering. Somewhere out there, raccoons or rats, or worse, were making their home just above him. But Cole Barrett had made his choice. He was here now, and come hell or high water, he'd make something out of this. He whispered into the darkness, as much to himself as to whatever ghosts the place held. Sometimes, the end of the road ain't the end. It's just the dirt path to something bigger. The road into Red Hollow wasn't marked by a signpost, just a rusted mailbox, half swallowed by kudzu, leaning at a crooked angle like it had given up holding itself upright years ago. Cole Barrett turned off the 2-lane blacktop onto the gravel path with a crunch that echoed into the trees. His old Ford sputtered in protest as it bounced over potholes and roots, the shocks wheezing like an asthmatic on mile 6. The late afternoon sun spilled amber light through the canopy, catching dust particles dancing like ghosts in the air. Red Hollow didn't appear on most maps. If it did, it was a footnote, a memory of a place that used to matter. The kind of town people left when the mill shut down or the mine dried up. Folks here didn't move away for better lives. They disappeared, like the wind had blown them out one night and forgot to bring them back. Cole crested a small hill, and the land opened before him. There it was, the Barrett farm. Or at least, that's what the tax auction papers had called it. The house sat like a wounded animal at the edge of the field, half its shingles missing, windows boarded or shattered. The porch sagged on one side, and weeds had swallowed the steps whole. Behind it loomed the remnants of a barn, its red paint faded to a rusty pink, roof partially caved in. He cut the engine. The silence that followed was near total. broken only by the ticking of his cooling engine and a crow cawing somewhere off in the pines. Cole got out slowly, boots crunching on the gravel. He stared at the place. "Well, hell," he muttered. "This is home now." He walked the perimeter, boots sinking into patches of soft ground and tall grass. The fields that stretched out behind the house might have once grown soybeans or sorghum, but now they were waist-high with goldenrod and devil's claw. Thorny vines snaked up from the tree line like fingers trying to pull the earth back into the woods. Cole tried the front door. Locked, of course. He circled around, found the back window already pried open, as if the house was just waiting for him to climb in. He hauled himself up, careful not to let the broken frame gouge his palms, and dropped into the kitchen. It was dark and musty. The air hung thick with mildew and old smoke. He fumbled for his flashlight, clicked it on. Cabinets hung off their hinges like broken wings. The fridge was an old 1970s unit with avocado green paint and a dead mouse skeleton inside. He turned away quickly. The living room was no better. Water stains spiderwebbed the ceiling, and the wallpaper had peeled away in curls that reminded him of burned paper. A broken rocking chair sat in one corner. A moldy couch faced an empty hearth where ashes still lingered, as if someone had left in a hurry decades ago and the place had been holding its breath ever since. He exhaled slow. All this for $900. A steal, maybe, if he didn't mind tetanus. As evening settled, he dragged in his duffel from the truck and laid out a sleeping bag on the only dry patch of floor in what might have once been a dining room. He boiled a can of chili on his small camp stove and ate with his legs crossed, staring into the dark corners of the house. It didn't feel empty. That night, as the wind picked up and the trees hissed like they were whispering to each other, Cole heard scratching from above, faint at first, then louder. He clicked on his flashlight, swept the ceiling. The noise stopped. Probably just raccoons, he told himself, or squirrels. Still, he didn't sleep much. The next morning, Cole drove into what passed for the center of Red Hollow. A gas station, a diner, and a hardware store made up the bulk of it. He filled up the truck with the last of his cash and stepped inside the gas station for coffee. The clerk, an older man with a long beard and nicotine-stained fingers, glanced up from his newspaper. "You ain't from around here," he said, not as a question. Cole offered a polite nod. "Bought the old farm on Millhouse Lane." The man grunted. "You mean the Whitmore place?" Cole paused. "Thought it was called the Barrett Farm." "Only on paper," the man said, setting his coffee aside. "Was Whitmore's long before the county got it. Waylon Whitmore's land. Burned up in '80. Barn fire. Some say he died in it. Some say he didn't." Cole felt something tighten in his chest. "Anyone lived there since?" The man shook his head slowly. "Nope. Place stayed empty. They say the ground went bad. Crops wouldn't grow right after. Animals kept dying. Kids went missing. Folks got superstitious." He leaned in. "That land's cursed, son. Has been since the Whitmore fire." Cole offered a tight smile and paid for his coffee. "Sometimes folks need a story to make sense of bad luck," he said, trying to keep it light. The man didn't smile back. "And sometimes the stories are truer than you want them to be." Back at the farm, Cole spent the rest of the day trying to clear the porch. He pulled vines, hauled rotting boards aside, and uncovered an old metal mailbox with the initials WW painted in faded black letters. Under the porch, he found a rusted tricycle half sunk into the dirt. It hadn't been moved in years. By sundown, he was filthy and exhausted, but the porch looked like something again. Not livable, maybe, but less like a crime scene. That night, the scratching in the attic came back. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Cole sat up, flashlight in hand, staring at the ceiling as if he could will it to silence. The noise went on for almost an hour before fading into the wind. He didn't sleep at all. The next morning, he found a fresh scratch on the hardwood outside the attic door. It hadn't been there yesterday. Something was up there. He took another long look at the house, the barn beyond, and the overgrown fields. The morning sun slanted through the trees, golden and soft. Birds chirped. A squirrel darted across the front yard. In that moment, it didn't feel cursed. It felt forgotten. And maybe, Cole thought, just maybe, Forgotten things deserved someone to remember them. He set his jaw and picked up his hammer. It was time to see what lived in the attic. By the third morning, the grime under Cole Barrett's fingernails had become permanent, and the blisters on his palms were starting to scab over. A rust-speckled hammer dangled loosely from his fingers as he stood on the rickety front porch, surveying the mess he had willingly thrown himself into. The red hollow sun beat down hot and cruel, painting the fields in a harsh yellow that made every flaw of the land more apparent. The farmhouse looked like it could collapse under a strong breeze. But Cole wasn't about to give up. He'd bought this place with his last dime. He was damn well going to see it through. The previous night had been rough. Something, or somethings, had scratched around in the attic until nearly dawn. He'd tried to ignore it, pulling his sleeping bag tighter around him on the warped living room floor, but each skitter sent adrenaline through his chest. By morning, he'd had enough. Today, the attic was his mission. He hadn't noticed the false panel before. It was tucked behind a warped closet wall upstairs, partially obscured by a broken coat rack and a moth-eaten trench coat still hanging from a rusty hook. The closet had smelled like dust and mildew, and something sharper, like burned wood. Cole squinted in the dim hallway light and pried at the panel with a crowbar. It groaned, then popped free like it had been waiting for someone to find it. Behind it, there was a narrow wooden ladder, gray and bowed, leading up into the unknown. He hesitated, heart thudding. "Well," he muttered, "I've come this far." The ladder creaked under his weight as he climbed. The air changed immediately, denser, older. The attic smelled like smoke and cedar and old secrets. It was sweltering. Shafts of dusty light pierced through slats in the boarded window. Cobwebs clung to the beams like ghosts, too stubborn to let go. The attic was cluttered with forgotten relics. A sewing machine with a broken needle, warped picture frames, a rocking chair missing an armrest. Cole's flashlight beam swept over them, but something drew his attention to the far corner, behind a broken dresser tilted on its side. He tugged at the dresser, grunting with effort. The thing scraped across the floor, revealing a rusted trunk, its lid barely shut, hinges green with corrosion. The leather straps had rotted away, and the padlock hung broken, like someone had already been here, once, long ago. Cole knelt. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. The first thing he saw was a bundle of cloth stiff with age. Inside it, neat stacks of cash, bound by brittle paper bands, hundreds, thousands. His breath caught in his throat. "No way," he whispered. He counted quickly. There had to be at least $40,000, maybe more. But the money wasn't the only thing. Beneath it was a worn oilcloth journal and a black and white photo so faded it was nearly sepia. Cole sat back on his heels, heart pounding harder now than it had when he found the cash. The photo showed 5 men standing in front of the very same barn that now leaned, half-collapsed, behind his house. They were dressed in work shirts and suspenders, the kind you'd see in an old war film. One man wore a fedora, his face half-shadowed. Another was tall, smiling faintly, arms crossed over a barrel chest. But the third man on the right made Cole's breath catch. He looked like his father. Not just a little, either. Same crooked jawline, same hawkish nose, same haunted eyes. Cole turned the photo over. In faded pencil, a few words were scribbled. Red Hollow, 68. Cottonmouth Boys. His hands went cold. Cottonmouth. He opened the journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting inside was dense, looping, and angry. Each entry was signed the same. W. Whitmore. Whitmore. The name triggered something vague. He flipped back to the deed paperwork he'd stored in a folder by the door. There it was. Prior owner, Waylon Whitmore. But everyone had said he'd died decades ago. According to the journal, that wasn't quite true. The entries were fragmented at first. Mentions of failed harvests, frustrations with the government, bitterness toward neighbors. But then things got strange. July 17th, 1971. They don't understand. The formula works. Damn near brought that corn back from rot overnight. Ain't natural, no, but it's progress. They'll regret laughing at Cottonmouth. August 3rd, 1971. The basement's too exposed. Moved everything to the barn tunnel. Safer there. Cooler too. Project Cottonmouth is no longer a theory. It breathes. September 12th, 1972. Raymond pulled out. Said he saw the serum do something wrong to the piglets. I think he's scared. I'm close. Closer than anyone's ever been. Cole read for hours, only stopping when his stomach growled loud enough to echo. The money was one thing, but the journal was something else entirely. Obsession, genius, maybe madness. It all seeped from the pages. Project Cottonmouth. Cole stared at the photo again, his gaze locked on the man who looked like his father. Growing up, his dad had rarely spoken about his childhood, said it was dusty and done with, and left it at that. The only story Cole could remember was a strange joke his father used to tell when he had too many beers, something about a cottonmouth lab and super tomatoes that grew back when you cut them. Cole had always chalked it up to drunken ramblings. Now he wasn't so sure. He pocketed one stack of bills and tucked the rest back in the trunk, careful to preserve the scene. Then he closed the journal and held it against his chest for a moment. This wasn't just some forgotten shack in Arkansas. This was a time capsule, buried on purpose, waiting for someone, maybe him, to open it. He descended the attic ladder slowly, each step heavier than the last. Outside, the sun had shifted west, casting long shadows across the fields. Cole stepped onto the porch, journal in hand, photo in his pocket, mind racing. His plan had been to flip this land, maybe grow a few crops, patch the roof, and scrape by. Now, he wasn't sure what the hell his plan was. But one thing was clear. This place held more than just dust and decay. It held secrets, legacies, maybe even redemption. He looked out over the overgrown fields, wind rustling the tall grass like whispered warnings. He said aloud, voice low and steady, "All right, Whitmore, let's see what you buried." And the shadows on the land seemed to shift, as if the ghost of Waylon Whitmore had heard him and was smiling in the smoke-stained dark. Cole Barrett sat at the old kitchen table, the rusted trunk beside him, its contents spread across the splintered wood like the pieces of a long-forgotten puzzle. The bundles of cash had been the initial shock. More money than he'd seen in years, stacked and faded, wrapped with yellowed rubber bands that cracked under the slightest pressure. But it was the journal that kept pulling his eyes back, its leather cover oil-stained and stiff, the spine barely holding together. He ran a thumb along the edge, the way someone might do with a book of scripture, knowing there was something sacred about what was inside. The pages were handwritten, full of hurried scrawls and deeply indented lines that suggested the author, Waylon Whitmore, had been writing under pressure, maybe even fear. The first few pages were mundane, weather notes, crop rotation plans, a complaint about the price of gas. But deeper in, the entries shifted. The language grew more cryptic. Mentions of Cottonmouth, tests, and the feed pit. Cole read each line aloud to the empty house, his voice echoing slightly off the bare walls. Stashed where the wind won't reach. Feed pit under the X. He frowned. What the hell did that mean? He flipped back to the front page. Tucked into the inside cover was a folded piece of paper, brittle, yellowed, and barely holding together. He unfolded it slowly, afraid it might disintegrate in his hands. It wasn't a map exactly, but it was something. A hand-drawn outline of the barn, with a bold X marked beneath the feed room. Cole leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He'd been sleeping just feet away from this thing, from a secret buried beneath his boots. Project Cottonmouth, he muttered. He said it again, slower this time, like tasting a word you haven't heard since childhood. His dad had joked about that phrase years ago, the Cottonmouth Lab. Back then, Cole had chalked it up to one of those half-tall tales Southern dads told after a couple of beers, part myth, part memory. He remembered sitting in the garage in Tulsa while his father cleaned wrenches and told stories about old Arkansas folks who got too smart for their own good. Something about a snake serum that was supposed to heal wounds, but instead made folks a little off. You mess with God's blueprint, his dad had said, he's gonna mess back. Cole always figured that was just his father's way of warning him off arrogance. Now, staring at the real journal of Waylon Whitmore, a man who'd been presumed dead in a fire, who was now probably his grandfather, the words felt heavier. He turned another page. This one was dated July 3rd, 1972. Shipment received, too unstable. Delaney worried. Annie's brother saw too much. Must move the rest to the lower room. Cottonmouth batch 3 shows promise, but side effects still present. Cole blinked. Delaney. That was the name of the man from the picture. The one who looked like he'd been carved out of oak and suspicion. Annie had pointed him out, or rather, had stared at the photo until her voice cracked. My uncle, she'd said. He disappeared the same year my mama stopped singing. Cole hadn't pressed then, but now, he picked up the photo again. 5 men, dusty boots, faded flannel. One looked like Cole's father, one like Annie's uncle, and the rest? Strangers, ghosts with secrets. He closed the journal gently and leaned back in the chair, rubbing his temples. The cash had solved one problem. He wasn't going to starve this month, but it had opened a dozen more. He wasn't just squatting in a ghost house anymore. He was squatting in history, the kind that people had buried deep, either because they were scared of it or because it had teeth. That night, Cole couldn't sleep. The wind howled through the eaves, and the house moaned like it remembered what happened here. He lay on the couch with the journal on his chest and the photo face down on the table. He kept glancing at the attic door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. Instead, he grabbed his phone. Spotty service, but enough to open a browser. He typed in Project Cottonmouth plus Arkansas and hit search. Nothing. Not one credible hit. He tried Whitmore Farm Fire 1980s, then Red Hollow Farm Fire, then Whitmore Lab. Still nothing useful. Only when he searched Feed Pit Government Experiment Arkansas did he get something strange, an old forum thread from 2003. It was just 3 posts, archived on a paranormal conspiracy site called Delta Deep. The topic? Farms used as testing grounds in the Ozarks. Post 1. Anyone heard of a Cottonmouth project out near Red Hollow? My uncle told me stories as a kid about a farm where people weren't allowed to go. Said someone burned it down in the 80s, post 2. Project Cottonmouth was a term I heard during my service, bioregeneration. Rumor was it failed horribly. Subject changes at a cellular level. No idea if it was real. Just a story we told the new recruits. Post 3. Stay away from Red Hollow. Not everyone buried in that fire was dead when the flames started. Cole closed the browser. The cold that crawled over his spine wasn't just fear. It was the kind of dread you feel when you realize you've stepped onto a path you can't back off from. He looked over at the journal one more time. That last line had hit different. Must move the rest to the lower room. Lower room. He hadn't seen a basement, hadn't seen a cellar. The barn had no lower level he could tell, but there was that raised platform where the feed pit was. And if that drawing was right, he stood, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped into his boots. The wind outside had died down, replaced by the hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of branches. The barn stood like a skeleton under moonlight, bones of something long dead but not forgotten. Inside, the air was cooler, earthy, smelled of rot and old hay. He walked to the feed pit, checking the floor with his boot. It was concrete, but newer than the rest. A different shade, smoother, like it had been poured over something. He knelt and tapped it, hollow, his breath caught. Then slowly, deliberately, he ran his hand across the concrete surface until his fingers found a slight indentation. A hairline crack, shaped almost like a square. Cole didn't sleep the rest of the night. He didn't dig yet, not without a plan. But he sat by that patch of floor with the journal in his lap, flashlight in one hand, and the knowledge that something more was buried here. Something bigger than cash, bigger than a cursed farm, maybe even bigger than himself. Outside, dawn broke red over the horizon, and Cole Barrett, for the first time in years, felt wide awake. The next morning brought a sky the color of pale denim, streaked with thin threads of sunlight, weaving through the trees that bordered Cole Barrett's newly acquired land. He stood at the edge of the porch, coffee in hand, staring into the tangled woods that stretched along the property's perimeter. The aftertaste of mystery still clung to him like smoke. He couldn't stop thinking about the journal, the cash, the faded photograph. What had he really stepped into? The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of pine and damp earth. Just as he took a sip of coffee, a soft crunching of gravel caught his ear. He squinted toward the dirt path leading to his property, half expecting another raccoon. Instead, he saw a woman, early 30s, strong frame, sun-kissed skin, walking with purpose, her boots kicking up small clouds as she approached. She wore jeans, worn at the knees, a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and a broad-rimmed straw hat she tugged off as she reached the steps. "You Cole Barrett?" she asked, her tone not quite friendly, but not unfriendly either. Cole nodded, raising his cup in greeting. "That's me. And you are?" "Annie Jo Mercer. I run the goat farm next door. Been meaning to swing by once I heard someone finally bought the Whitmore place. Didn't think anyone would." She glanced behind him at the battered farmhouse, her expression unreadable. Cole gestured toward the porch chairs. "Care for a seat?" "I've got coffee, though it ain't fancy." She eyed the chairs like they might bite. "I'll stand, thanks. Just wanted to see who was bold, or dumb, enough to move in. Folks in Red Hollow don't usually touch this place." "Yeah, I picked up on that. Got warned by a gas station clerk and 2 stray cats." He offered a crooked grin. "But I've got a soft spot for fixer-uppers." She didn't smile. Instead, she crossed her arms and asked, "You find anything yet?" Cole blinked. "Anything? Like what? Old junk, documents, maybe a journal?" Her voice had a pointedness that made him stiffen. He played it casual. "Found a lot of raccoon droppings, does that count?" Annie Jo narrowed her eyes. "Let me guess. You were poking around the attic, weren't you?" Cole didn't respond right away. The way she'd said it, not asked it, told him all he needed to know. She knew more than she was letting on. He exhaled. "Found a trunk, some money, a journal. Didn't think it was local gossip material." "It's not gossip. It's history, and secrets. That place has got more than a few buried in its bones. My uncle was one of the men in that photograph you probably found. The one by the barn." Cole stared at her. "Your uncle?" She nodded solemnly. "Earl Mercer. Disappeared in 1974. Was tight with Waylon Whitmore and a few other Hollow boys. They were into something big, something they tried to bury when things went sideways." "Hollow boys," Cole repeated, the phrase like a taste he hadn't yet decided if he liked. "Sounds like a band." Annie Jo gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, well, they made a lot of noise. Secret society, some say. Others think they were just good old boys getting rich off things Uncle Sam would have frowned on. My daddy always said they were smarter than the government gave them credit for, but dumber when it came to keeping secrets." She pulled a folded photograph from her pocket and held it out. It was the same image Cole had found in the trunk. 5 men, all with that same serious stare. She tapped one. "That's my uncle. That's Waylon. And that," she said, pointing to the man on the far right, "looks a hell of a lot like you." Cole's stomach turned. "My father left when I was a kid. Never said much about his past," Cole muttered almost to himself. "Bet he had a reason. Bet he knew what was out here and wanted to keep you away from it." "You really think this place is cursed?" She shrugged. "I think some things are better left buried, but if you're going to go digging, you best know where to shovel." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You offering to help?" She hesitated. "I'm offering to keep you from getting yourself killed. There are folks still living who don't want Whitmore's secrets seeing daylight, and they might not take kindly to you stirring up ghosts." The breeze lifted her hair and carried the heavy scent of pine through the porch. Cole nodded slowly. "All right, Annie Jo Mercer. If you know something I don't, I'm all ears. But just so you know, I'm not planning to stop digging." "Didn't think you would," she said, adjusting her hat. "You've got that same look Waylon had in every photo, like you've already made peace with whatever trouble you're about to find." She turned and walked back down the dirt road, her boots thudding against the gravel with the same certainty she'd arrived with. Cole watched her go, feeling the first true flicker of something beyond curiosity. Resolve. He wasn't just here by chance. He wasn't just here to rebuild a life. He was here to uncover one. As the trees swayed in the wind, whispering old secrets, Cole turned back toward the house. He had work to do, and maybe, just maybe, a partner to do it with. By the time October crept in, the days at Red Hollow had grown shorter, but Cole Barrett was beginning to find a rhythm in his new, unpredictable life. Morning chores, fixing whatever part of the house screamed the loudest, and evenings on the front steps with a mason jar of sweet tea and a sky full of Arkansas stars. It wasn't much, but it beat the motel stench and the daily dread of checking his dwindling bank account. The cash from the trunk had bought him time, supplies, and a flicker of something he hadn't felt in months: hope. He'd been focused on reclaiming the attic. There was something about that space that wouldn't leave him alone. Maybe it was the smell, smoke and cedar, or the way the air felt heavier up there, like the house was holding its breath. Or maybe it was just that old feeling he knew too well from his years as an engineer. When something didn't add up, you had to keep looking until it did. On a brisk Wednesday afternoon, after replacing rotted boards in the corner of the attic near the gable window, Cole noticed a gap in the planks overhead. He grabbed his flashlight and angled it upward. Something was wedged between the beams, tucked so deep it was invisible from below unless you were tearing the place apart, which of course he was. Balancing on the old workbench he'd dragged up 2 days prior, Cole used a crowbar to nudge the object loose. It clattered to the floor, a long, narrow metal tube capped on both ends with rubber stoppers. It was old, but surprisingly intact, and stamped faintly with the letters WW. He popped it open and carefully pulled out a rolled-up blueprint, brittle but legible. It depicted the layout of the barn out back. But someone, likely Waylon Whitmore, had scribbled red markings all over it. X's in strange spots, especially beneath the structure, and a few notations in shaky cursive: under feed pit, false panel in east wall, and the most cryptic, dig where the echoes fade. Cole unrolled the blueprint on the attic floor, weighing the corners down with bricks. He studied every line, every mark. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The feed pit had collapsed years ago. It was now just a pile of cracked cement and rusted tools, overgrown with thistles and wild oat. But if the blueprint was right, there was something beneath it, something Waylon had hidden. The next morning, Cole paid Annie Jo Mercer a visit. She met him at the gate with a wary smile, her denim overalls covered in hay. "You look like a man with something to confess," she said, crossing her arms. "Found a map," Cole said without preamble. "In the rafters. Waylon's old blueprint of the barn. There's something under the feed pit. You up for a dig?" Annie's eyes narrowed, but not with suspicion, more like reluctant curiosity. "You sure this ain't just wishful thinking?" "As sure as I can be without a shovel in my hand." "Then I guess we better get digging." They started the dig that afternoon. The ground fought them every inch. The feed pit was covered in years of sediment, tangled roots, and stubborn stones. Cole swung the sledgehammer while Annie cleared debris with a metal rake. Dust rose like smoke from the concrete as cracks began to spiderweb across its surface. After hours of grunting and swearing, the last slab broke away to reveal packed dirt beneath. Annie's flashlight beam swept across something that gleamed faintly: metal hinges. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered. It was a hatch, old and crusted with time, but unmistakably man-made. Cole wiped the sweat from his brow, heart thudding in his chest. "Should we open it?" Annie shot him a look. "You really gonna stop now?" They pried the hatch open with a crowbar, the hinges groaning like an old man stretching after a long nap. A gust of stale underground air rushed up to meet them, thick with mildew and something harder to name: history, maybe, or secrets. A wooden ladder descended into darkness. Annie handed Cole a flashlight, then drew her own from a belt holster. "Ladies first," she said with a smirk. "Not a chance. I've seen this movie." Cole climbed down slowly, boots landing on dirt-packed flooring 10 feet below. His beam cut through the gloom to reveal stone walls, old power lines, and something that looked disturbingly like a hospital gurney. Annie followed close behind, her breath audible in the silence. The room opened into a corridor, narrow and reinforced with wood and iron. There were doors on either side, most rusted shut, but one opened with effort, revealing a chamber full of old scientific equipment. Glass tubes, rusted centrifuges, medical charts pinned to corkboards. A dusty chalkboard read, in faded script, "Cottonmouth Trials, Phase 2. Cole and Annie stared at each other. "Well," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "guess this ain't your average goat barn." Cole walked deeper into the room, feeling the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He picked up an old VHS tape labeled Regrowth Test, Subject B4. Another said, Reactive Compound Results, July 1973. There were file cabinets along one wall, most jammed or empty, but one opened with a loud creak. Inside were folders marked, Do Not Remove, Government Property. What the hell were they doing here? Annie muttered. Cole didn't answer. He was staring at a faded newspaper clipping pinned to the wall. The headline read, Local Inventor Declares Breakthrough in Crop Yield Tech. The photo was of a much younger Waylon Whitmore, the same hard jaw, the same eyes, and behind him, the barn. They had uncovered something bigger than cash, bigger than a lost journal. You think your granddad was part of all this? Annie asked quietly. I think, Cole said slowly, he didn't want anyone finding it unless they had the blood and the guts to go looking. And Cole Barrett had both. Cole Barrett stood on the edge of the dark pit, the scent of earth and old metal rising up from below like a ghost exhaling. The hatch groaned, protesting as he and Annie Jo Mercer pushed it open the rest of the way. They had worked in silence for hours to break through the packed layers of cement and dirt beneath the barn's feed pit. What had started as idle curiosity had snowballed into something much bigger, heavier, older. The air down there was cooler, not just from depth, but from disuse. It smelled untouched, like something that hadn't seen the sun in decades. Cole clicked on his flashlight and aimed the beam downward into the unknown. A steep set of rusted metal stairs descended into darkness. You sure about this? Annie asked, brushing dirt off her jeans and looking at him sideways. Cole offered her a tight smile. Not even a little. But he took the first step anyway. Each footfall echoed against the metal, the sound swallowed by the thick silence below. The stairs creaked, groaned, threatened to buckle under the weight of time and intrusion, but they held. The deeper Cole went, the more the world above seemed to fall away. The light from the barn disappeared, replaced by the clinical glow of his flashlight sweeping across cold, damp concrete walls. Annie followed, her boots steady, her breath audible in the still air. At the bottom, the space opened up. It was a lab. Not just a cellar or bunker or fallout shelter, but a fully built, fully outfitted underground laboratory. Steel tables, dusty instruments, long-dead overhead fluorescent lights, and walls lined with whiteboards still scribbled with equations. What in the hell? Annie murmured, stepping past him. Cole felt like they had cracked open a tomb. Nothing had been touched in decades, and yet the place looked as if the scientists had only just stepped out for lunch. Mugs still sat beside rust-stained sinks. Clipboards rested on counters, their paper yellowed with age. A computer monitor, something pre-90s, was half covered by a tarp in one corner. Cole moved toward a bulletin board pinned with brittle notes and diagrams. One caught his eye. Project Cottonmouth, Phase 3, Data Extrapolation. He pulled it down and read quickly. DNA sequences, crop trials, medical terms he didn't fully understand, and references to LB compound trials and genetic drift mitigation. These people were doing bio-research, he muttered. Serious stuff, government level, maybe higher. Annie was scanning a row of cabinets, pulling them open one by one. Some held sealed vials and tubes, all long since degraded. Others contained files, neatly labeled by year. She tugged out a drawer labeled 1973. Here, she said, handing him a folder. Whitmore's name, on the author line. Cole opened it. Inside were hand-typed reports, each stamped confidential in red ink. And there was the signature, Waylon Whitmore. So, he didn't die in the fire, Cole whispered. He disappeared down here. The far end of the room held a thick, reinforced door. Cole approached, expecting it to be locked, but it groaned open with a push. Beyond was a smaller chamber, more intimate, a dormitory. There were bunk beds bolted to the walls, lockers with faded name tags, a kitchenette with unopened cans still stacked on the shelves. On one of the beds, a journal sat open, its last page half-written. They said Phase 4 would bring salvation, but we've gone too far. Cottonmouth isn't a cure. It's something else now. I fear what we've created. I fear what we've become. Cole stared at the page for a long time. Annie sat down across from him, her voice low. You think they were trying to cure something? Maybe, but it sounds like they made something worse. He stood, the weight of it all beginning to settle into his bones. This wasn't just some abandoned science project. This was classified, buried, forgotten for a reason. There was a reason that Hatch was covered with concrete, a reason the place had been erased from public memory. Then Annie found the tapes. They were stored in a locked cabinet, which Cole pried open with a crowbar. Inside, rows of VHS tapes labeled in faded marker, Trial A1, Subject D, Cottonmouth Control, and more. They brought one up to the barn and found an old TV with a VCR in the attic, one of Cole's early finds he'd meant to toss. It worked, barely, and whirred to life as they pushed in the tape, labeled Subject A3. Grainy footage appeared, a man seated in a medical chair, IVs in both arms. A scientist stood beside him, reading off a clipboard. Day 3 post-injection, rapid cell regeneration observed. Subject claims improved vision, stamina, and memory retention. Side effects include... Then the man began to shake, convulse. His eyes rolled back. The screen flickered, cut to black. Cole hit eject. They didn't speak for several minutes. Annie finally whispered, "That ain't just science. That's something else." Cole nodded. He felt it too, like they were standing on top of something with roots much deeper than they could see. He looked back toward the barn, toward the farm he now owned. There was more buried here than just secrets. There was a story unfinished, and now he was part of it. As night fell, they sealed the hatch again, but Cole knew they'd be back. The truth was, down there, tangled in the past, waiting to be untangled, and whatever Project Cottonmouth really was, it hadn't been buried deep enough. It was past midnight when Cole heard the distant crunch of gravel outside. The old farmhouse sat silent under a thick Arkansas night, its crickets chirping like an uneasy chorus. The glow from a single lamp in the kitchen painted soft yellow squares on the walls, illuminating a space that had slowly begun to feel like home. But this sound, this slow, deliberate sound of tires crawling up the long driveway, sent a chill down his spine. He reached instinctively for the rusted crowbar he'd kept leaning by the door since the night he'd found raccoons squatting in the attic. Looking out through the cracked blinds, he spotted a matte black pickup, its headlights dimmed to parking lights only, crawling forward like it didn't want to be seen. Cole slipped out the back door and made his way around the side of the house, boots crunching softly in the gravel. The truck came to a stop near the barn. The engine shut off. For a moment, there was nothing but the night. Then the door creaked open. A figure stepped out, a tall man in his 60s, broad-shouldered and weathered like old oak. He wore a military-style jacket, dark jeans, and boots that had seen more than their share of roads. A ball cap shaded his face, but when he looked toward the barn, Cole could make out a sharp jawline and the cold precision in the man's movements. "Frank Delaney," the man said into the night air, as if the shadows were listening. "You sure picked a hell of a place to die, old friend." Cole stepped into view, crowbar in hand. "You're a little late, mister. This land's mine now. You got business. Best make it clear." The man turned slowly, unfazed. "You Barrett?" Cole nodded. The man didn't flinch. "Then I'd say we need to talk." Cole stayed planted, crowbar resting on his shoulder. "You got 30 seconds before I call the county sheriff." "I'd save your minutes," the man said. "I'm not here to cause trouble. But what you're sitting on, it ain't forgotten, just buried, and there's a difference." He stepped forward slowly, hands visible, showing no weapon. Cole noticed the glint of a service tag around the man's neck and a faded patch on his sleeve, U.S. Army Special Projects. His voice carried the weight of command, the kind that didn't need to shout to get respect. "You found the lab, didn't you?" the man asked. Cole didn't answer. "I figured. Waylon Whitmore didn't keep secrets very well, not from the right eyes. And when word reached me that someone had bought this place for $900, I figured it was only a matter of time before the past came knocking." Cole's grip tightened. "What do you know about Waylon?" "Plenty," the man replied. "He wasn't just some recluse who vanished in a fire. He was part of something bigger, something the government was real eager to forget. Cottonmouth wasn't just a project, Barrett. It was a weapon in the making. And some of us, well, Some of us swore to make sure it never surfaced again. You were part of it? Delaney looked past Cole to the barn. I watched men grow crops that healed wounds overnight, and others that twisted minds in ways you can't imagine. What started as miracle farming turned into something darker. Enhancements, regrowth, control. We were playing God and losing. Cole exhaled slowly. And now you're here to, what, bury it again? Delaney shook his head. I'm here to warn you. The people who originally funded Cottonmouth, they're still out there. Private now, quiet. But they got deep pockets and long memories. If they catch wind that the lab's still intact, you're not going to be able to hold this place with a crowbar and good intentions. Cole stood in silence. The wind rustled the pine trees like whispered threats. Why tell me? Delaney paused. Because you're family, aren't you? You think no one noticed that one of the men in the photo with Waylon looks like your old man? Cole's breath caught. How do you know that? I knew your father, Danny Barrett, smart, skeptical. He left when things got bad, changed his name, disappeared. We all thought he was dead until your name came up at the auction. Cole stared at the man, his mind reeling. He never talked about any of this. He said nothing. Some ghosts ain't meant to be passed down, Delaney said. But now you've dug them up. They're yours whether you want them or not. He turned and looked at the barn again. You got choices, son. Bury it, burn it, or expose it. But know this. Whatever you do, it'll cost you. Truth always does. Delaney reached into his coat and pulled out a weathered envelope. This was meant for Waylon's family in case of exactly this. Guess that means it's yours now. He tossed the envelope to Cole and headed back to his truck. I'll be watching, and others will be too. The pickup rumbled back down the drive, taillights fading into the dark. Cole stood motionless, envelope in hand. He opened it slowly. Inside was a faded map of the farm, marked with coordinates, a list of names, a date, October 9th, 1972, and a single handwritten line. If you're reading this, you've already stirred the hornet's nest. Find the truth before they find you. Back inside the farmhouse, Cole spread the contents of the envelope across the kitchen table. Annie Jo arrived minutes later, alarmed by the truck. He didn't hurt you? She asked. No, Cole said quietly, but he might have just changed everything. Annie read the note, her jaw tight. Frank Delaney. My uncle used to talk about him, said he was a ghost with a badge. They're watching us, Annie. We're not alone out here. She looked at the map. Then we better stop poking around in the dark and start getting ahead of it. Cole nodded, voice steady now. Time to finish what Waylon started, or at least figure out what the hell it really was. Out the window, the barn loomed against the moonlight, and somewhere beneath it, Cottonmouth still waited. The knock on Cole's door the following morning was soft but persistent. 3 slow raps, then silence. He pulled his sore body out of bed and peered out through the screen. It was Annie Jo, holding a paper bag in one hand and what looked like a sealed envelope in the other. Her face was unreadable. Brought you breakfast, she said when he opened the door, and something else. Cole took the bag with a nod of thanks, but his eyes were on the envelope. It was old, yellowing at the edges, sealed with a small circle of red wax, stamped with a W. Where'd you get this? It was tucked inside my uncle's tackle box, she said. I never opened it. Figured if he hid it, there was a reason. But after what we found under that barn, I figured you ought to see it. Cole didn't say anything. He opened the envelope carefully and slid out a folded letter and a small photograph. The photo stopped his breath. 5 men stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a brick wall, young, hard-eyed, serious. One of them was Waylon Whitmore, unmistakable even decades younger. Another had to be Annie's uncle, Jim Mercer. But it was the third man, standing slightly apart with a familiar sharpness in his jawline that made Cole's stomach twist. It was his father, or someone who looked damn near identical. He flipped the photo over. In smudged ink, Project Cottonmouth, March 1974, WWJMLBRBDS. His hands trembled, and he took a seat on the porch rail. You okay? I think this confirms it, Cole said. My father, he was part of this, or at least connected. RB, that's Richard Barrett, my dad. He stared out at the horizon for a long moment before asking, "Do you think Jim's still alive?" Annie didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her boots. I used to believe he was just hiding, living off the grid somewhere. We were close, him and me. He gave me my first pocket knife, taught me how to milk goats. Then one day, poof, gone, like smoke in the trees. Cole unfolded the letter next. The handwriting was precise, almost too neat. To my blood, should they ever return? If you're reading this, then the secrets of Red Hollow have clawed their way back into the light. Project Cottonmouth wasn't a myth. It wasn't just conspiracy talk or whiskey-soaked campfire stories. It was real, dangerous, and brilliant. We tried to create something that could help the world. We failed. Some of us walked away. Some of us paid for it. My son, if you ever find this, know that I never wanted to bring you into this world of shadows. I tried to bury it with me. But blood calls to blood, and I fear the land won't let us rest until the truth is known. The journals, the lab, the tapes, they're only pieces. The real work, the real danger, lies in what we didn't destroy. There's more hidden. I left instructions where only family would think to look. If you are truly my blood, the land will guide you. Cole folded the letter slowly. The ache in his chest was heavy and strange, a mix of anger, sadness, and a small flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. I need to be sure, he muttered. Not just photos and notes, DNA. Annie raised a brow. You serious? Dead serious. If I'm Waylon Whitmore's grandson, if Dad was Richard Barrett and he was in on this, then I need to know for sure. It took 2 days for the kit to arrive, a day to send it back, and another 5 for the results. In that time, Cole and Annie continued restoring parts of the farmhouse, cataloging what they'd found in the underground lab, and securing the hatch with a reinforced lock. Cole also installed a trail camera outside the barn. When the DNA results finally came in, Cole opened the email with shaking hands. Paternal match, 99.9%. Waylon Whitmore. He sat back in his chair, the screen glaring into his face. A chill swept through him. Annie stepped into the room, holding a pair of work gloves, and paused when she saw his expression. It's him, Cole said. He was my grandfather. My dad changed his name, started a new life. I never knew. I thought he was just some angry mechanic who drank too much and didn't talk about the past. Annie set the gloves down. Well, looks like you didn't just buy a farm, Cole. You inherited a whole damn history. That night, as they sat on the porch, sharing cold beers in silence, a battered Ford pickup rolled into the gravel drive. Cole stood, hand resting on the doorframe. Annie joined him, eyes narrowing. The man who stepped out was in his 60s, gray-haired, weathered like an old fence post. He moved slow, careful, and looked right at Cole. You're Barrett's boy, aren't you? He said. Cole stepped down from the porch. And who are you? The man smiled sadly. Name's Jim Mercer. I reckon we need to talk. Dawn broke over Red Hollow in soft streaks of gold, and the old farm, once buried under years of dust, vines, and forgotten memories, stood silent, but stronger than ever. Cole Barrett sat on the newly sanded porch steps of the farmhouse, boots planted firmly on the wood he had spent weeks repairing. His elbows rested on his knees, and in his hands, worn and scarred as they were, he held the last page of Waylon Whitmore's journal. The sun's warmth rose steadily, pushing out the chill of the Arkansas morning, and with it came a certain clarity that had eluded Cole for months. He had come to Red Hollow with $926 in his pocket, a duffel bag of clothes, and the kind of desperation that makes a man consider anything with 4 walls and a roof a step up from the gutter. Now, he had a place that wasn't just shelter. It was a piece of something bigger than himself. After confirming his DNA connection to Waylon Whitmore, the last puzzle piece had clicked into place. The man he had always known as his father, Dean Barrett, was, in truth, once known as Dale Whitmore, Waylon's estranged son. The truth was buried deeper than the lab under the barn, wrapped in government secrets and long-held family pain. Cole had cried that night, quietly, not out of grief. but because he finally felt rooted. The decision came easily after that. He and Annie Jo had digitized the journals, the lab notes, the grainy VHS tapes that cataloged the experiments done under the name Project Cottonmouth. Instead of hoarding it or selling the information to the highest bidder, they uploaded it all, anonymously, to a secure server, backed by whistleblower protection programs and non-profit health research institutions. Cole made sure that the name Wayland Whitmore sat on the header of every single file. A week later, the first response came, not from the government, not from the military, but from independent researchers and physicians stunned by the implications. The Cottonmouth serum, regenerative, cellular enhancing, wasn't just real, it was revolutionary. But Cole kept control. The nonprofit he created in Wayland's name, the Whitmore Foundation, held all the rights, all the data, and all the oversight. Every step forward in research would be public, ethical, and transparent. No more secrets, no more buried truths. The money from the trunk, combined with small grants and local donations, went into restoring the house and barn first. Then slowly, acre by acre, they cleared the overgrown fields. Cole didn't want to run a big farm. He wanted something sustainable, crop rotations, heirloom vegetables, small-scale regenerative methods. He planted seeds in soil that hadn't seen real care in decades, and they took to it like they were just waiting for someone to believe in them. Annie Jo stayed. At first, she came by to help on weekends. Then she brought her goats. Then she brought a toothbrush and her favorite skillet. Cole never asked her to move in, but one morning, she was cooking eggs on the old stovetop and humming to herself like she'd been doing it forever. She never asked him to say the words either, but he did. One night, just as the stars crested over the tree line, he looked her in the eye and said, "You're home to me." They built something together, not just a farm, but a sanctuary, a place where science, family, and legacy could coexist. The barn, once a place of shadows and government secrets, now held research interns and sustainable ag students from the university. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Word spread slowly. A news outlet picked up the story. Forgotten lab in rural Arkansas yields hopeful medical breakthrough. They didn't name Cole or Annie, just the foundation. And that was how Cole wanted it.